Uh, Thank you, all of you, for joining today's Swadhyasa Chakra dialogue. We will start today's session with an invocation of a song. So let me just share the screen, please. And I request you to please mute yourself so that we can avoid disruption.
அன்னை மொழியே அழகார்ந்த செந்தமிழே முன்னைக்கும் முன்னை முகிழ்த்த நறுங்கனியே அன்னை மொழியே அழகார்ந்த செந்தமிழே முன்னைக்கும் முன்னை முகிழ்த்த நறுங்கனியே கன்னிக்குமரி கடல் கொண்ட நாட்டிடையில் கன்னிக்குமரி கடல் கொண்ட நாட்டிடையில் மன்னியரசிருந்த மண்ணுலக பேரரசு மன்னியரசிருந்த மண்ணுலக பேரரசு அன்னை மொழியே அழகார்ந்த செந்தமிழே முன்னைக்கும் முன்னை முகிழ்த்த நறுங்கனியே
Thank you so much for your kind attention. I, Randhir Kumar Gautam, on behalf of Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, welcome you in today's Swadhyasa Chakra dialogue on the very interesting topic, that is development poetics and creative Tamil traditions. It is a great pleasure and indeed an honor to have available with us respected speaker, deep scholars, friends, and all Swadhyasa Chakra family members. I welcome Professor Nirmal Selvamony. He is a creative thinker and deep scholar of English literature, music. He has been former professor of English at Central University of Tamil Nadu. I welcome moderator of today's session, Professor Ananta Giri. Swadhyasa Chakra members, Professor Gyan Gului, Dr. Janal Singh Anand, Minati Pradhan ji, Sandeep ji, Sonal, and all friends both on Zoom platform and Facebook platform. Professor Nirmal Selvamony is well-known scholar from South India. He has more than 40 books, more than 50 chapters in books, and more than 40 research papers, journal conferences paper. He's a very unique scholar in the sense his interest is very vast. He has major interest in music, eco-theory, dramatic theory, eco-criticism, and he has a deep understanding of acknowledging some of the significant ideas of society, literature. He has founded a forum which is very important, very unique, called Thai Nai, and to promote a new sense of understanding of society and literature. Thank you so much, Professor Nirmal sir, for accepting our invitation to share your thought. Let me also give a brief introduction to our Swadhyaya Chakra circle. It is called core learning circles of self and mutual studies, which is an initiative of studying and learning together self, culture, societies, and the world. Friends associated with these are eager to walk and mediate with new horizons of thinking and new movements of social and cultural change at work in our contemporary world. We are study seekers such as Sri Aurobindo, Mahatma Gandhi, Chitranjan Das, a creative soul, creative thinker from Orissa, and many others from around the world. We invite people from different fields of life to share with us their knowledge, wisdom, insights for creating a world of beauty, dignity, and dialogue. We meet every Sunday, and we have collaborations with many important institutions in India and abroad to cultivate the very idea of dialogue and knowing the world in a better sense. So with this brief introduction, may I like to invite Professor Ananta Giri to give a brief introduction of the theme. So Ananta bhai, over to you.
Thank you so much, Randhir, and thank you, Professor Nirmal Selvamony, and friends co-present. It is a joy to have the presence of Professor Selvamony tonight, and we have shared our paths together for many years, and it has been an enriching experience. And this theme today, development poetics, is so important, and Professor Selvamony brings a Chennai perspective to it. And Chennai in terms of the landscapes and different zones of society, ecological zones, social and ecological zones, and how these zones create aesthetic considerations. And therefore, the space and time coming together, and ethics and aesthetics coming together. So we look forward to learning from Professor Selvamony. And what is also so important is learning about many bright aspects or many creative aspects of Tamil traditions. When we talk about aesthetic theory, and mainly we discuss a few things. But today our very idea of India leads to our ideas of many themes that we associated with India. And in the context of opening of our epistemologies, ontologies, now there is talk about the epistemology of the South. And all this requires much more multiple conversations within and across as part of planetary conversations. So, for example, in this paper, out of many themes that Professor Selvamony, in discussing the notion of mantra, literature as mantra, even aesthetics as a mantra, and he's referring simultaneously to Sri Aurobindo's notion of mantra and how words as a literature becomes mantra, as well as he's referring to Tolakappiyam. And in Tolakappiyam also, there is a journey with mantra. And what is that journey? That there is a hidden meaning. And that hidden meaning needs to be uncovered. The Aurobindo in his Savitri says that there is hidden eternities that we would have to give manifestation to. And Professor Selvamony's simultaneous attention to Sri Aurobindo and Tolakappiyam also opens a very interesting kind of striving and sadhana that has gone into mutual learning. Like Sri Aurobindo on this 150 year, that how he came to stay in Pondicherry, and while coming to live in Pondicherry and living with Subramaniam Bharati, he learned Tamil language. And he has translated also Tirukural. And I think Sri Aurobindo's journey with Tamil language is not much known. And because he travels, and a deep philosopher, his name is Daniel Rave, a very dear friend and a very deep thinker. In his essay on Sri Aurobindo, he presents Aurobindo as a lingual pilgrim. And what we find in the sadhana of a pilgrim and a scout, an adventurer of consciousness like Sri Aurobindo, is that as we journey with a language, with multiple traditions, we also find the resonances among them. And what Sri Aurobindo in his journey with Tamil language, at a very deeper level, he finds the resonance also at a deeper level between Tamil and Sanskrit, and going beyond many of the superficial level kind of distinctions, though he does not discount that. The significance is that we need to really undertake our own journey with multiple traditions of India and the world. And once we do that, so therefore we look forward to be enriched by the creative Tamil traditions, especially its specific view of aesthetics, ethics. I also here remember a very deep thought presented by Albert Schweitzer in his so important work, The Development of Indian Thought. And I chanced upon this book in Romarola Library in Pondicherry. And while reading that, tears came to my eyes. And he's writing, Schweitzer, who has never visited India. And he's reflecting upon the multiple streams in Indian thought. He's reflecting on Bhagavad Gita and Gandhi, and and what he's writing, that the kind of ethical consideration and that priority to human community, ethics, and a sense of service that is cultivated in Tirukural, according to Schweitzer, it is one of the earliest such engagement for Schweitzer in human history. And he also said that in Indian thought, it is a very early effort. So therefore, Swayathar's reading of Tirukural and is so significant. And this is all an invitation for us to open ourselves to reach Tamil traditions. And we look forward to being enriched by Professor Selvamony. Please welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Ananta. And thank you, Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, for inviting me to interact with this forum. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good. So, my topic is development poetics, Chennai aesthetic view. I think this essay is circulated, so some of you might have glanced through it and seen what it is all about. Just wanted to make a couple of observations before I just really start with my presentation. I need to say that, my ideas are largely shaped by old Tamil vocabulary, which is somewhat, I think, problematic when I attempt to translate that into English language. It's not just a question of finding verbal equivalent, but trying to get the idea across, the concept across in another language, which belongs to an entirely different family of languages, the Indo-European family and a Dravidian family, two entirely different families. But but that's no excuse. But if you have any, if you want any clarification for any of these ideas, I'll be very happy to kind of try to help you out with that. And also, while using English words, some very common words like society, for example, I'll be using, I'm trying to use the word community instead of society, thinking that, that'll be helpful, because when we use the word society, we very often think only of humans, whereas the kind of community, which is the equivalent of the English word society, particularly in the context of Chennai, will have to include beings other than humans, like animals, birds, plants, etc. And another kind of cautionary note would be about gender, because particularly when I talk about Robert Frost's poem, Stopping by Woods, I have to specify the gender, so I would probably use the masculine gender, not because I favor males, but I think that helps us to understand the particular context in Robert Frost's poem that we are talking about. So with these kind of preliminary remarks, I would now begin the actual presentation. Now we know that from 1960 onwards, the word development has come to mean primarily economic advancement. From an ecological perspective, this is not a very helpful meaning, I'm afraid. So in 1990, I attempted to restore the original meaning of the word development. So in order to further the cause of what I might call ecological salvation, which we badly need, I think, these days. I mean, this essay was titled De-Development, a Case for Tradition. Now, etymologically, development consists in making manifest what is latent, as in the case of the now outdated photographic processing, which reveals the latent image or picture in the film. So we talk about developing a film. These days, probably it's outdated technology, but the meaning is still there, I think. Now, communitarian development will enable a community to realize its ultimate eco-moral vision necessary for it to be the best possible one for all its members, human and other beings. So when we talk about developing a community, I'm suggesting that we bring the best out of that community, and that would be the eco-moral vision of that community. The early Indian eco-moral vision involved three ultimate values: morality or ethicality, denoted by the Tamil term aram; substance or value, denoted by the term porul; and happiness by the term inbam. Now, Professor Ananta wanted me to say something about Tirukkural and Silappatikaram. So I think at this point, I might say something about Tirukkural. He himself now talked about Tirukkural a little bit as to how, Schweitzer saw it and translated it and so on. So Tirukkural is actually a state society text. Many people date it to the 2nd century AD. So it is not a text from Chennai community, but it comes, in the post-Chennai on the state society times. But though it is a product of state society, it actually continues the tradition of Chennai. There are very good evidence for that is the very framework, the ethical framework in which the whole text is, laid out. Arathupal, Porutpal, and Kamathupal, the three divisions of the text, are squarely based on the three ultimate values of Chennai. Now, this doesn't mean that Tirukkural is a Chennai text. I'm not suggesting that at all, because there are elements from his own society. The influences, the very strong, for example, the Jaina ideas are there in the text, which have nothing to do with Chennai as such. But in spite of the presence of ideas from external influences or later influences, Tirukkural remains a very important text to understand the worldview of Chennai also, not just the worldview of the state society, the later society. If you want to contrast it with Arthashastra, the ethicality of Chennai, Tirukkural is pretty unique because Thiruvalluvar, the author of Tirukkural, would say that even if one were to get the whole world on a platter, one shall not compromise ethicality. A king, at no cost should sacrifice ethicality for gainful benefits, like annexing another's territory or so on and so forth. So ethicality is very important while he is, using strategies to combat an opponent or whatever. Now, that is not the same kind of ethicality probably you find in a text like Arthashastra, I think. because, there a king might use any effective strategy to achieve his end, including, sometimes deceitful strategies. But such thing is not, allowed. That's not normative, at least, in the case of Tirukkural. So that's, I think, a marked difference between, the political economy of Tirukkural and the political economies of other texts, or you can even think of the Chinese, the Art of War, or Machiavelli's The Prince, or they are an entirely different kind of political economy. Particularly the ethicality of the political economy of those texts are completely different from the ethicality of Tirukkural. So having said that, let me just go ahead with this idea that I'm trying to develop. So if our late capitalistic, crisis-ridden, anthropocenic contemporary societies lack or seek development, they should get rid of those unnecessary acquisitions since the post-primal era, which began around 10,000 BC. I'm saying 10,000 BC because that's the time, I think, when state societies emerged in the world. Now, we should shake off those deterrents acquired from the time of state formation, acquisition, deterrents like agricultural economy, subjugation of humans and other animals, birds and plants, and all contagions that disrupted the kinship relation among humans and beings other than humans, in order to realize the underlying ultimate eco-moral vision that I mentioned a little earlier. In short, development consists in letting the primalness or thinniness of a community to manifest itself. So primalness or thinniness consists in the primordial relation among the members of the community in question. In early Indian tradition, such relation was known as thinai. Now, let me just say something about this thinai. Thinai means many things, but the meaning most relevant to our deliberation now could be this one. It's the pre-state communitarian order of humans and beings other than humans who stand in a harmonious relationship. So I'll just repeat that. Thinai is the pre-state communitarian order of humans and beings other than humans who stand in a harmonious interrelationship. Before the emergence of the state, Thinai life way lasted for more than 100,000 years, probably. But still, the humans in Thinai lived without degrading the earth and its systems too much. In each of the 4 biomes of the earth, the mountain, scrubland, riverine plains, the sea coast, and the arid tracts, which they inhabited, they coexisted very harmoniously with the natural cultural elements relating to other humans and beings other than humans in a very heterarchic manner, if you like, blending authority and equality at the same time. In such a relation, the relata exist in a state I would call differentiated continuity. So differentiated anti-continuity manifests as symmetry in Thinai, but tends to become discontinuity and asymmetry in the state, industrial, and information societies. Consequently, progressive asymmetrization can only imperil true development. Achieving optimal anti-continuity in Thinai, which manifests as symmetry, the reliable indicator of development is itself a kind of making of poesis, or in Old Tamil, cheyul. Though all human actions aspire to the condition of cheyul or poesis or making, art praxis approximates to that condition better than non-art praxis like science or technology, for example. Now I will demonstrate how poetry develops by unfolding its what I call sound sense body, a body consisting of sound and sense, which kind of organically, symbiotically, exists together. This sound sense body manifests varying degrees of ontic-continuity in different types of community. The major limbs of this verbal body could be sound, idea, and action. To make the verbal body, poets combine the limbs in different ways. True, the poem, especially in Chennai, is more than its body. It is organically related to a community, ritual, its tradition, and the specific context itself. All of these aspects will have to animate the verbal body to make it what it has to be. But now we will focus only on the verbal body of the poem particularly, and show how it is developed or not developed in different communities. Symmetry at the levels of action, idea, and sound results from a focus on one central idea that is either presented or developed in the composition. Though features of the primal composition may be found in state, industrial, and information societies, optimal symmetry in the verbal body is found, I think, only in the songs and poems and art entities of Chennai or primal communities. When such symmetry marks the composition of the non-primal communities, to that extent, those compositions should be considered primal in nature. Now let us look at this example. For example, this is a Chennai song. Nilathinum peride, vaninum uyarndandru, neerinum aaralavindre, charal, karungol kurinji pookondu, perundhen ilaikum nadanodu natpe. So that's a song from an anthology called Kuruntoge, which is one of the texts of what we call the Sangam corpus or Sangam literature. So here is my English translation of this Tamil song I just now, recited. Bigger than the land, higher than the sky, more unsoundable than the waters, is love for Narden of the hill slope, where wild bees build hives from honey, from black-stalked Kurinji flowers. I'll read that again. Bigger than the land, higher than the sky, more unsoundable than the waters, is love for Narden of the hill slope, where wild bees build hives from honey from black-stalked Kurinji flowers. So that's my translation of that song. Let's first of all consider the structure of this song. I think if you are looking for a seed of this song, the seed from which the entire song kind of blossomed, I would say it's the word natpu, which here means love. From this natpu, this word, Tamil word, a whole plantling, if you like, a young plant with its root and 3 branches and 2 flowers, they all come out of that seed. So I would consider this phrase, Nadanodu natpu, which means love for Nadan, as the root of this plantling. And the word peridu as one of the 3 branches that I mentioned. Peridu means big, and it means my love for Nadan is big. Nadanodu natpu peridu. Now, the second branch would be the word uyarndadu. That's high. Nadanodu natpu uyarndadu means My love for Nadu is a very high one. It's as high as the skies. And the third branch would be the word Aralavindru, means, unsoundable. So Nadanodu Natpu is Aralavindru, means that love is unsoundable, as deep as that. And the flowers from this plant line would be the phrase, the first flower would be the phrase Perundhen Iழைக்கும், which would mean wild bees will build beehive. Now here, the word beehive is a metaphor for love. So that's the flower that blossoms from the seed Natpu. And the second flower would be the phrase Karungol Kurinji Poo Kondu, meaning with black stalked Kurinji flowers. So these two flowers, blossom from this seed, Natpu or love. Now, differentiated, let me see, try to explain what I mean by differentiated continuity in this context. Now, the three branches and the two flowers, the site of the interactive actions of Tine, because interactive action is one of the aspects of Tine. So those actions develop the seed idea into a metrically regular verbal body, which ensures continuity without sacrificing adequate differentiation. Differentiated continuity seems to be the structural principle governing the unstated metaphor for love, the beehive. Each cell in a beehive may look like a perfect hexagon, but the cells of the dragons are slightly, not dragon, I'm sorry, terribly sorry. But the cells of the drone bees, are slightly larger than those of the worker bees, and those of the queens are the largest, as we know. The making of such an intricate structure involves a cooperative process that is gradual, painstaking, and yet delicate. It's also an example of communitarian praxis. The relationship between the lovers might have started at a moment when both were entranced by love at first sight, but the hiving relationship is not a momentary one, like the first sight. It continues throughout the lives of these lovers. The lovers need to build their relationship in the initial stages in a clandestine manner, in dark corners of backyards, gardens, and groves far away from the prying eyes of strangers. Meeting at tryst is not easy, especially for the male lover. He has to brave the dark, the wild animals, thieves, rough terrain, and inclement weather to meet his girlfriend. Nor is it easy for the girl. The moment the family gets wind of the affair, they confine the girl in the house, preventing her from going about her regular chores, like guarding the millet field or gathering flowers in the groves, which are great opportunities actually for the lovers. She also has to go through all the uncertainties the affair engenders. The worst of them is the male lover's procrastination. The carefully crafted love finds its equivalent in the well-wrought song itself. That building the beehive is a skilled craft of poetics, as I mentioned, is suggested by the word Iழைக்கும், the Tamil word Iழைக்கும் in the song. The central phrase Nadanodu Natpu, or love for the male lover, is like the queen bee itself in the beehive. She produces the other bee-like words and phrases that qualify the two words of the central phrase. These words and phrases produce pleasure, even as the bees produce honey. Reading the lines is like tasting verbal honey. Though there are numerous syllables and words which are like the honey bees, the poem achieves a symmetry that characterizes the beehive. Symmetry in form, to some extent, determines the genre of articulation itself. greatest symmetry is found in the genre called mandiram. For example, the syllable om, which literally means S, becomes mandiram when it is repeated, creating symmetrical sound shape. If the repetition of the vowel O provides continuity, the consonant does difference. The continuously differentiating vowel and consonant create a kind of symmetry. Further, the repeated symmetrical form acquires a kind of power also. The Tamil suffix tiram refers to the power of mandiram. Mantiram. Power does not reside innately in the sound, but it's the repetition of the sound that gives the mandiram its power. Spells and chants are textual genres that could be considered mandiram because they are based on the technique of repetition, which in Tamil is called vodudal. And in that respect, they too have the power to control the mind. Yet another feature of mandiram is that its power endures. And this idea is conveyed by the verbal base, man, which itself means permanence. This means that the power or tiram of mandiram is lasting. Such power comes from its sound symmetry, actually. We may contrast texts, such as those in free verse, which lack sound symmetry, with mandiram to see the difference. Sound symmetry is regulated by meter, which is this sound body. Though not all verbal texts based on symmetrical structure may be termed mandiram, mandiram is always symmetry-based and therefore has lasting power. It may be, quite an interesting thing to compare Aurobindo's idea of mandiram with Tolkappiyam, but for want of time, I will not dwell on that. But it's quite, I think, important to recall at this point that Aurobindo considered poetry itself, as a kind of mandiram genre. According to Tolkappiyam, which is the most ancient Tamil text, mandiram has three important characteristics. One, it is uttered by those whose words take effect when uttered. It's not uttered by everybody, but a special, a kind of persons who have the power, to somehow effectuate, their words, or they have the power to make their words take effect when uttered. And it's authoritative, and mandiram uses language which has hidden meaning. Those who can utter such powerful words do so with authority, and the primal composition is closer to mandiram, like the song that I recited to you right now, Nilathinum Peridev Vaninum Uyarndandu. That song, is closer to mandiram because it gains its power from its simple and symmetrical structure. In the case of the song, the three qualities of love, bigness, highness, and unsoundableness, as well as the meter, make the form of the song symmetrical and invested with lasting power. Mannuginra Tiram. However, not all primal songs were four-liners, as the song that we just now considered. Incantatory utterances like Om could be just a single word or phrase repeated a few times. In a ceremony of the Pawnee Indians, the American Indians, we have a typical instance of this variety. Now, they have a 5-word line, that is a line consisting of 5 words, which is repeated 6 times. Now, the line, when translated into English, means, I know not if the voice of man can reach the sky. So this, line is repeated 6 times. Now, here's another example from the Pygmies. So their mandiram-like, utterance goes like this. So translated into English, it will read, spear, spear, strike home, spear, spear, strike home, oyo, oyo, strike home. So this may be repeated several times. The crucial word spear is the seed, like the word natpu in the song that we looked at, from which unfolds the predicative strike home, which together constitute, that is spear and strike home, together constitute a verbal body of the song of the Pygmies. Sung in a hunting ritual to the accompaniment of a dance, the song helps the participants focus on the act of spearing game. The verbal body of such compositions is governed by a symmetrical verbal shape, which affirms both continuity and differentiation. The simultaneously differentiating continuity in primal poetics can be best understood in the light of the nature of the primal community itself. The Tamil word for this kind of society is Thinai, which Professor Ananta, Giri, and Randhir, they mentioned this. So I need to just now I would like to tell you something about the etymology of this word, which really kind of unlocks a richer meaning, behind this term. The term Thinai derives from Inai, which means pair. It also means spouse, and it also means the fifth relation in music, the relation between sa and pa, the pitches sa and pa, for example. Now, if you have an Indian instrument in which sa and pa are tuned, usually Indian instruments are tuned sa and pa, and if you strike these two strings together, if the instrument is tuned really well, you are likely to hear a single pitch rather than two pitches. Now, the spousal relation is like that. The two spouses are two, but at the same time, they are one. Now, there is enough differentiation because there are two, persons, but at the same time, they are not two, they are one. So that's the nature of Thinai, or the kind of community it is. So the human and the other members achieve kind of maximal continuity without losing ontic differentiation of each. Such a state is not oneness, so we cannot reduce it to a kind of a monastic state. But there is enough differentiation also. So I call this differentiated continuity. And this manifests in 4 modes. And I borrow these terms from musicology, and they occur in the text Silappadigaram. Professor Ananta wanted me to say something about Silappadigaram, so I would just say this about this text. Silappadigaram literally means a text in which the anklet which women wear, rules. So it is a text about the anklet, or where the anklet is the central motive. Now, interestingly, the anklet is also a metaphor for the protagonist, the female protagonist, and in this epic, it is Kannagi. So it is actually the story of Kannagi. There are 3 major divisions in this epic: Puhar Kandam, Madurai Kandam, and Vanji Kandam. That is action that's set in Puhar, which is the capital of the Cholar, and Madurai, which is the capital of the Pandya, and Vanji, which is the capital of the Chera, the 3 monarchs. So obviously, this is a state society text, just like Tirukkural. We see Kannagi married to Kovalan in Puhar Kandam. They are a very happy couple, but then their happiness is not very lasting. It's kind of, it's disrupted when Kovalan leaves Kannagi, and takes a fancy for a dance use called Madhavi. And the second Kandama section, the Madurai Kandam, we find him kind of leaving Kannagi and coming to Madurai to make his fortune, because he has lost all the fortune on this danceuse Madhavi. And in Madurai, when he comes to sell the anklet of Kannagi, because of the plotting, the conspiracy hatched by the goldsmith who works in the Pandyan king's court, Kovalan is kind of charged with the crime of robbing the queen's anklet, which was missing. And then, he is killed. And Kannagi kind of takes up this issue. I mean, she goes to the court, demands justice, and the king realizes the big blunder, on his part, having killed an innocent man. He thinks that his rule is very unjust and right now very unethical. So he kind of loses his life. I mean, he takes his life. This is a good instance of, the ethics in Tirukkural that I was talking about. And in the third section, we find Kannagi being deified as a goddess, as Pattini. So the king of the Chera dynasty makes a shrine for Pattini and inaugurates the worship of Pattini, that is Kannagi worship. And finally, we find, Kannagi ascending to the heavens, and the story ends there. But, what's interesting is this is a very unique epic, because I think it's quite, there's no epic, no text like this anywhere in the world, I think. Because Ilango is not the Ilango Adigal, a Jain monk, who's the author of this text, is not just telling a story, an interesting story, but he is doing several things, while he's composing this text. He is kind of creating an encyclopedia of Tamil culture at that point of time. But interestingly, just like Tirukkural, this text also continues the Thinai tradition in a very big way. The five Thinaigal, which I mentioned earlier, are represented here in different ways. Like the Aichir Kuravi, for example, is a kind of dance of the scrubland people of Mullai Thinai. The Vetuvari is that represents the ancient Thinai tradition of Palai Thinai. Kunja Kuravi is the one that represents the tradition of the Kurinji Thinai. Kanal Bari is the representation of the coastal aesthetic tradition, and so on. And the Indra Vida, is kind of a retelling of this narrative of the Marudam Thinai, with necessary modifications, and so on. So that's the text from which I have borrowed these terms for the four kinds of relation that I'm talking about. So the first relation I mentioned is Ine, which is spousal. Then you have the kin relation, which is Kile. And then you have the affable or friend-like relation called Natpu, and the conflictive or Pahe relation. The last one, Pahe or conflictive relation, in particularly Thinai, provides the necessary creative tension, which obtains, for instance, in verbal and physical trials of strength. So conflictive or Pahe should not be taken as completely negative enmity or so, but a kind of creative conflict, if you like. Now, the four modes of differentiated continuity have their parallels in poetics too. If spousal relation expresses itself in optimal symmetry in action, thought, and sound, in a metaphorical mode, kin relation obtains when there is a positive hierarchical organization of the poetic elements, as in an epic simile, for example. When parallel poetic elements such as subplots are introduced in a metonymic manner, the relation becomes affable. In fact, a tinge of tension could also spice up primal poetics. So there you have the creative tension. Now, of these four modes, the conflictive is predominant in state, industrial, and information societies. As a result, there is progressive discontinuity among the members of the community in an increased manner, creating disruption of the community itself. In poetics, conflict manifests as irony and paradox, which often presuppose binary opposition. Good and evil become types, as in medieval Western literature. Now, all this happens in the state society texts. If post-primal poetics is based on the ethic of discontinuity, the ethic of continuity marks primal poetics, as I said earlier. For example, in early Tamil Thinai drama, we do not have any absolute evil persona like the villain or Satan in the Bible, for example. This does not mean that all the actions of the personae are absolutely good or beyond good and evil. It only means that good and evil are not absolute categories, but gradable ones on a continuum of agency, not unlike the shades in a color spectrum. Laughter is recognized as one of the 8 primary emotions by the Tamil Thinai tradition. And the dramatis personae of Thinai world did emote laughter when necessary. But there was no attempt to create a persona type as such, like a clown or a vidushaka, who embodied laughter, because the emotions were not seen as absolute ones, but as I said, gradable entities on an emotional continuum. Even Silappatikaram does not, have clown or an equivalent sort of a persona. The correlate of the ethical and emotional continuity is praxic continuity, which yields the type of plot that is not based on conflict, but cyclicality. For example, the master narrative of Agapurul, or roughly translated home life, of the Thinai is based on cyclicality and not on conflict as such. In stark contrast, emotions, ethical categories, and action are considered as absolute entities in the state societies that are based on the ontology of discontinuity. Emotions get sharply defined in the art of the state society. If sorrow is the fundamental emotion of tragedy, mirth and laughter are of comedy. As for ethical categories, the poetics, the Greek text poetics, a text shaped by the worldview of the stratified society of the Greek city-states, is based on the dualism of good and evil, though Aristotelian hero is not wholly evil or good. Under the influence of Christianity, a religion based on dualistic ethic, good and evil are represented as absolute dualistic categories. In the book of Job, Satan is not an absolutely evil persona, but in the New Testament, he is. Absolute moral categories are found in the medieval moralities also. The incipient dualism of poetics becomes absolute in the medieval age, in the Western medieval age, I mean. Like emotions and ethical categories, like them, action is also dualistic. Now let us look at this poem, Stopping by Woods by Robert Frost, which was written in 1922 and published in 1923. Now here also you will see this dualism that I'm talking about. Everybody knows this poem anyway, just in case, I'll just recite it for you. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village there. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and the frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep. but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. On the one hand, the protagonist watches woods, which is a sort of contemplative act. Such an act is opposed by a thought about the possible owner who lives in a village, and also by the horse's act of shaking the harness bells. A more subtle conflict operates at the level of what the protagonist wants to do and what the woods wants the protagonist to do. In fact, it is possible to argue that the protagonist's action and utterance in the poem are entirely a response to the call of the woods itself. Had the woods not appealed to the protagonist, he would neither have tarried there nor uttered the words he did. In this regard, it is worthwhile to consider what Tolkappiyam has to say on this matter. According to Tolkappiyam, it is the external world that prompts human actions. The natural cultural entities of the world of Chennai generate feelings, thoughts, and motivation in the agent, human agent. Only when the protagonist saw the woods of someone was he moved to say the poem that I just now recited to you. So the snow-covered woods on a wintry evening generate the thoughts that are uttered by the speaker persona. True, one may have thoughts of things one had never seen or experienced also. For example, it's quite possible to speak of ghosts and gods and ghouls in a poem, as many literary artists have already done. But what Marlowe says about Mephistopheles or Milton about Satan derives from what Marlowe and Milton had experienced in the real world, actually. This is true of science fiction or magic realism also, or any other fantasy genre for that matter. Artists working in the above-mentioned genres combine real world entities in interesting new ways to give rise to entities that we had never seen before or never existed before. This shows that human creation is possible only with materials found in the real material world, and that is why Tolkappiyam rules that the natural cultural entities generate our thoughts and feelings. The natural entities called the woods are the generative part of the community, constituted by humans and entities, natural and supernatural. In the addresser, the woods generate thoughts and prompt him to perform the act of uttering the song. And in this respect, the woods are the addressee that initiate poesis. The addresser speaks not his own words, but those of the addressee, and performs not his own actions, but those of the addressee. But for this to happen, an appropriate context, or what I would call kalam in Tamil, is required. The context of this frost song is such landscape as one finds in the darkest evening of a winter month in New England, probably just now. And it's winter in the Western Hemisphere right now, as you know. We're talking about a path that runs along someone else's woods, lying in the outskirts of a New England town, where there is no other creature except one's own horse. We understand that the path, the woods, and the place from where the addresser watches the woods are all moral or ethical places. While it is right to occupy one of these, say the path, it is not right to stand elsewhere to watch the woods. When the place is seen not qua place, but in relation to human action, especially when a place becomes the context of action, human relation to place becomes ethical or unethical. While the term context does not suggest the ethicality associated with that through human action, the term kalam does. As measured place, kalam draws a boundary around the action. Since time cannot be disassociated from space, kalam ought to be a measured place-time, a dynamic and constantly unfolding stage that enables and delimits action. Now, there are actually three kalangar in this text. Probably I would skip that. I mean, I'll probably maybe considering the question of time, I think. Well, I would just probably focus on three or four major modes of conflict in this poem. One, the imagined conflict between wood watcher and the owner of the woods. Two, the imagined conflict between wood watcher and his horse. Three, the appropriate location to watch the woods from, as against the inappropriate place to watch woods from. And the fourth conflict is the one between appropriate time to watch the woods and inappropriate time to watch the woods. So in all these four modes, the opposition comes from an agent other than the wood watcher. And the reader may presume that the conflict will be resolved by coming to terms with the external agent. The first three stanzas present the conflict as if it were between performance and external resistance to performance. The most crucial conflict, I think, is not yet mentioned by the addresser. It comes only in the last stanza. There we find that the conflict is actually between the act of wood watching and the act of promise keeping. This means that the opposing forces are two interests of the wood watcher himself. And this is revealed only at the last moment. Till we arrive at the last stanza, we are under the impression that the conflict is between watching woods and not watching them. In other words, the conflict is not just between performing an act and not performing it, but between one act and another. Further, if the former action is possible in a single column, the latter act actually presupposes two. Now, how does the auditory body of the poem present this conflict? The entire poem, except for a rare substitution in the line 3 of the poem, everything else is uniformly iambic. The iamb, a kind of foot in the poetic line, mimes the conflict of hierarchic opposition because it consists of the stressed and the unstressed syllables. The stressed syllable tends to be privileged over the unstressed, as the relatively more important thought coincides with the former, the stressed syllable. But the thematic conflict is not distinguishable from the non-thematic conflict in terms of the sound of the poem. In other words, the hierarchic conflict in the poem is only represented by the iamb and not by the other metrical aspects like line and stanza. This gives the poem a symmetrical sound body like that of the primal song, Nilathinam Periri, we considered, though the action that animates the sound body is conflictual and therefore asymmetrical. So the asymmetrical action does not find an objective correlative in the sound body of the poem. Now, if metrical symmetry and praxic asymmetry characterized pre-modernist poetry of the industrial society, asymmetric form and action marked the modernist art of the society. A typical example is T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Interestingly, Eliot's Wasteland was published in 1922, the same year when Frost, wrote his poem, Stopping by Woods. So this poem of Eliot's presents the binary idea of life and death in a very paradoxical manner using free verse. In this text, there is neither progression of thought nor any strict sequence of ideas. From line 15 onwards, we may presume that the speaker is Mary and that she uses the inclusive plural we and us because she is in the company of another persona and her companion is not necessarily her addressee. But the reader is not sure who the addressee is. A gross violation of the addressorial convention occurs in line 70 also, when the speaker persona tells the addressee that both of them were together in Mylae, an ancient port in northeast Sicily in 260 BCE. The most important addressorial conventions, such as place and time, are discarded, causing both epistemic and praxeological anarchy. Now, epistemic anarchy results from Eliot's penchant for paradoxical thought, as evident in the lines, I quote, "The copse you planted last year in your garden, has it begun to sprout? Will it bloom this year?" So I end the quote. When the persona says, "Winter kept us warm," that's also a quote. It is not so much a reference to global warming as an expression of the oxymoronic thought. The oxymoron is winter is actually summer. Praxeological anarchy results from the flouting of adversarial convention necessary to differentiate actions that constitute the plot of the text. The reader is at a loss to know who the addresser and addressee are actually. If we take Tiresias as the master personaic addresser, who somehow contains within him all the individual personaic addresses in the text, we are not talking about the Greek prototype Tiresias at all, who most certainly was not a timeless, placeless, godlike creature. To say that Mary is Tiresias is to cause adversarial anarchy, if you like. Now, Eleotic oxymoron is based on what I may call absolute monism, which probably derived from Vedantic sources, which annihilates difference. Difference is ensured only by the categories of place and time, which govern the real world. Identification of one place with another and the annihilation of diachronic time result in anarchy. Such identification is different from its counterpart in Chennai. For example, the coastal girl who regards the Punnai or Indian laurel tree, her sister, in a song in Sangam poems, identifies a particular tree in a particular place with her sister, and such identification ensures continuity without violating the laws of place and time, and without jeopardizing ontic difference. But Eliot's oxymoronic monistic thought, which underlies the wasteland, is not monistic because it denies the diverse world, nor is it a variety of identification that obtained in Chennai, but because it violates the conventional laws of place and time themselves. Due to the anarchization of place and time, the basic elements of Kalam and Chennai, the agencies in the wasteland is indeterminate and discontinuous, resulting in the aborting of poetic unfolding. In short, if pre-modernistic art desired unity despite its asymmetry, modernist art experimented with the aesthetic of anarchy. So far, I've tried to show how the representative poetic texts from the state, industrial, and industrialist societies evince an increasing degree of discontinuity among the members of the society, leading to progressive estrangement from the ultimate eco-moral vision that I began my presentation with. In other words, these societies, that is the latter society, state and industrialist, have not undergone true development in order to manifest their latent Chennai-ness. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Nirmal Selvamony. It was very deep presentation, and your lecture is a kind of invitation for us to also acknowledge the indigenous traditions, particularly Tamil traditions, to know about the deep sense of poetry. And what a beautiful presentation you begin with Aurobindo and in some of the very famous poets. So thank you so much. It was a very excellent session. So now many of eminent poets also joined today. So I would request respected participants to share your thought also. So may I invite Dr. Jarnail Singh Anand. Dr. Jarnail Singh Anand is a poet from Punjab. And I request you to please note down this question or comment, and you can answer at the end. He's taking some time, so may I invite Professor Gyan Gului to share your thought.
Thank you very much. I do not know. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah.
you are audible.
Yes. Thank you very much. It was really very interesting, I must say, and I will have to reflect much on the points because unfortunately very many points I did not know, but it was really very interesting. I was impressed in particular by the quotation and the allusion to Milton, and I would like to ask whether you could elaborate something on the
வணக்கம்
theme,
சார்.
but I should
சார் வணக்கம்.
myself, I should myself think a long time about all your points because they were really very, very, very complex for me and new, and I need to reflect. So I thank you anyway very much. It was really very, very interesting, very rich, and I will meditate on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Randhir, do you want me to answer that, respond to that?
Yes, please respond.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. I kind of mentioned Milton in the context of the point that I was making. The point was that everything that we say, we do, or let me put it this way, all our ideas, thoughts, feelings, and so on come, I mean, mainly, they are generated by the external world. Now, when I say that as a question, like, what about, some mythological creatures and, such entities like, the archangels or Satan himself, the personae that you find in Milton's Paradise Lost, for example. So you don't find them in the real world. So how did ever Milton get them? Like, where do they come from? That's a natural question anybody would like to have. Now, the point I was making was that even those fictions, figments of the imagination, or those, shall we say, some mythological or mythic creatures, entities, are fashioned out of the entities that actually exist in the real world. So only out of the real world material can we ever create the imaginative world material also. Now, that was the point I was making. So I'm just mentioning Milton as a poet who had used a lot of, mythological personae in his text. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Suganti Dos, I request you to please say your thought. Yes.
சார் வணக்கம். வணக்கம் சார். ரியலி சார் வணக்கம்.
உங்க பேரு?
Hear my sound. சார், என் பேரு சுகந்தி தாஸ். எனக்கு ரொம்ப 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 மகிழ்ச்சியாக இருந்துச்சு. ஏன்னா திணை என்ற ஒரு சப்ஜெக்டை நீங்க தொட்டு திருக்குறள் ஆரம்பிச்சு எல்லாத்தையுமே, குறுந்தொகை, சிலப்பதிகாரம், எல்லாத்தையுமே நீங்க டச் பண்ணீங்க. திணை என்பது ஒழுக்கம் அப்படின்றது நல்லா தெரியும். ஆனா நீங்க திணை என்பதற்கு பல பொருள்கள்லாம் இங்க சொன்னது எனக்கு ஒரு புது தகவல்கள்லாம் கிடைச்சது இந்த கூட்டத்துல. அப்புறம் இதுல இந்த சிலப்பதிகாரம் என்பது பெண்ணை மையமா வச்சு எழுதப்பட்ட இலக்கியம். அத பத்தி நீங்க பேசினது ரொம்ப 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 மகிழ்ச்சியா இருந்துச்சுங்க சார். இந்த நேரம் எனக்கு ரொம்ப பயனுள்ளதா இருந்துச்சு. ரொம்ப சந்தோஷம் சார். தமிழ்ல உங்ககிட்ட நான் இந்த பேசக்கூடிய வாய்ப்பு வழங்கின இந்த கூட்டத்துக்கும் நன்றி. ரந்தீப் சாருக்கும் நன்றி. மிக மகிழ்ச்சி சார். வணங்குகிறேன். மிக்க நன்றி.
நன்றி.
சந்தோஷம் சார்.
ஆக்சுவலா இந்த திருக்குறள், சிலப்பதிகாரம்ல நான் சொன்னது, அந்த கிரெடிட் கோஸ் டு Professor Ananta.
Thank you, sir.
Gave me an opportunity to say something about that.
தேங்க்யூ சார்.
Yeah.
தமிழ்ல மட்டும்தான் சார் இலக்கியங்களை வந்து அக இலக்கியமாகவும் புற இலக்கியமாகவும் சொல்றாங்க. தமிழ்ல மட்டும். அப்புறம் வந்து சிலப்பதிகாரத்தோட மணிமேகலை வந்து இரட்டை காப்பியங்கள்னு சொல்றாங்க. இந்த 2 இலக்கியங்கள்ல தான் இந்த வந்து பெண்களை வந்து மையமா வச்சு எழுதியிருக்காங்க.
உண்மைதான்.
நீங்க விரைவில் வந்து எங்களுக்கு இது போன்ற ஒரு இலக்கியங்களை இந்த மணிமேகலையிலையும் ஒரு சிலப்பதிகாரத்திலையும் ஒரு பெண்ணோட மன வலிமையை பத்தி சொல்லியிருக்காங்க சார். இது போன்ற ஒரு டாக்கிங் நீங்க இனிமேலும் நீங்க பேசணும் அப்படின்ட்டு நான் வந்து ரொம்ப தயவா கேட்டுக்கிறேங்க சார். கட்டாயம். ரொம்ப 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 சந்தோஷம் சார். வணக்கம் வணக்கம். மிக்க நன்றி வாய்ப்பிற்கு. தேங்க்யூ சார். தேங்க்யூ so much.
Thank you, Sugati Das. Yes, Dr. Jindal Singh Anand.
Hello.
Yes, you are audible, sir.
Thank you so much. I really feel very thankful to Dr. Nirmal ji. It was a very, very enlightening discourse. And I can relate to it personally also because when he talks of imaginative creations out of the reality that we are facing, I hope, Randhir, you are aware that this is what, as a poet, as a writer, I have been doing. Particularly my this Mahakal trilogy and the last work, The Alternate Age, which comes up with an alternative mode of living, being, thinking, all that. One question which I want to address you, sir, and to all the intelligentsia here is that we have been indulging in very highly sophisticated discussion on poetry, on aesthetics, on creation, on interpretation, everything. What actually baffles me is a general question, and it is that literature is meant for the people, for the well-being of the people. So the major issue that confronts me as an author is how what I am writing or we are discussing today, how it can be connected to the man in the street. I think he is absolutely unaware of what Robert Prof says. And so many things. Ordinary people are not aware of these things. But we people in universities, in colleges, in classes, in MA classes and MPhil classes, and in PhDs, we are discussing things which are absolutely disconnected with society. That is for which we profess that we are living for them, we are writing for them, we are doing this and that for them. So my question to you today is how to how to fight that disconnect which has come up between the intellectual on the one side and the ordinary man who does not understand our language, who does not understand the nuances that we are discussing. He is quite unaware of these things, but we say we write for you. And if he doesn't understand what we are saying, there is a gap which needs to be addressed. So to this our August assembly, I put this question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I ask either Professor Ananta or Mr. Randhir to introduce the speaker and say, kind of some, I got the last point that he was making, but I missed some of the first things that means he said. So can you just sum it up for me?
Yes, it is like how, because poet sometimes talks about very, complex language. And that is not well understood by the common people. So how we can, talk about or make it, in a a good way of a good aesthetics of poetry in the sense. The same question, one of our in the chat box also, somebody called Merylens also wrote that I am quoting him. I thought poetry could change everything, could change history, could humanize. And I think that's the illusion is very necessary to push poets to be involved and to believe. But now I think that poetry change only the poet. So there is this question, I think, is connected with Dr. Jarnail Singh Anand's concern.
So the first person who spoke is he a poet? I mean, I think is he a poet?
He's a poet.
Okay, so I would like to know his name and what language he writes in. And can you say something about that?
He is a poet based in Chandigarh.
Okay.
And he writes in English and also in Hindi, Punjabi.
Okay. So what's the name of the poet?
Dr. Jarnail Singh Anand.
Okay, thank you.
I will send you his details.
Okay, thank you. So this is a very big question. I don't think, I can answer it away, but I can definitely think along with you the complexity of this question. This has been problematized, in aesthetics also, like people who talk about what is poetry and so on, they also kind of discuss this issue. Wordsworth said, it's man speaking to men, so he said, I derive everything that I say, my language, everything from, ordinary people. And Coleridge actually disagreed with him. And he said, your poetry is not what ordinary man in the street might, speak out. Though, Thomas Gray's verse is a little more stylized and looks like a work of art, So the artifice in Gray's poetry is very obvious, whereas in your poetry, that is Mr. Wordsworth's poetry, it is not very obvious. You, of course, give the semblance of writing in a very ordinary style, like, for example, in Frost poem that I read out to you, he writes in a very simple language. But still, you are writing a poem. I mean, you are selecting certain items and omitting certain items, putting them in a very interesting ways in the line itself, and all of that, which ordinary people don't do when they, speak. Ordinary conversations do not really bother much about the arrangement of the sounds, that they use in the words. Whereas a poet is always very sound conscious. How many of us utter our sentences paying attention to the sounds of the sentence that we are saying? Like, but you need to pay attention to that if you want your alliteration, if you want your rhymes, and so on. You need to do that too. So a poet does not really speak the ordinary language as it is. Poets might claim that their poems are very close to ordinary language, but there is always, the divide in some way because of form, because poetry has a certain form, you need to bring things into that form. The moment you do that, you're pushing language from out of ordinary conversation into, art, into the province of art, Cheyyul, as it is. In Tamil, we say Vazhakku and Cheyyul. So Vazhakku is the convention, the worldly conventions. But Cheyyul is aesthetic conventions, involves aesthetic conventions. So that is happening all the time. But having said that, I might also add that poets have privileged difficulty in certain times, what you call obscurity. So the more obscure, the more difficult, the greater the poem, the greater the quality of the poem. It's Eliot, I think, once said that modern poetry, or modernist rather, poetry ought to be difficult. So that is, that's the kind of aesthetic I think you are challenging. Like, if you sort of privilege difficulty in your poetry, you are definitely estranging yourself, alienating yourself from the ordinary man. And I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't really buy that kind of an aesthetic, personally, if you ask me. I also sometimes lapse into poetry, but I don't do that full time. But I do sometimes in Tamil and in English. But I would, like my language to be as close as possible to ordinary language, but at the same time, I wouldn't compromise form, so I don't know whether that helps you.
Minati Pradhanji.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. First, I would like to thank Professor Nirmal Selvamony for his very excellent presentation. Thank you so much, sir. You enlighten us of different technicalities of the ancient indigenous Tamil poetry. So even though I speak little bit of Tamil and understand, but the poetic languages I cannot. So it is beyond my reach to, if somebody recites also to understand it. But conversation I can follow and I can do also. So just one small doubt, it may be a little bit out of context. So I was just asking that Tamil has all this Sangam literature, Bhakti and contemporary. You covered up all these Sangam literature and Bhakti up to some extent. So I would like to shed some light on that contemporary, Tamil literature, how it is. Because in Sangam literature, it has been said, it is very rich and highly sophisticated set of notions. As now General Singh Anand sir was telling, there is always a gap. Means it has come from there to spoken words of poetry. In contemporary poetry, how the same question again, how we can maintain the gap. And one more small question I wanted to ask about the Silapatigram you was telling about Kannagi. Some scholars say it is the first feminine movement of Tamil. Is it true? I'm asking this personally. That is the question. Thank you.
Okay. Probably I will start with your final question, the second question. Is that, did you use the word feminism or did you say femininity, or, I didn't hear that.
Yes, I said, they said, no, that is one type of, you said that feminist movement like that.
Okay.
She was standing for herself.
Okay.
Like some,
Yeah,
as I don't know how to read Tamil, I have just read the references. So,
okay. As you know, feminism is a 20th century movement. Though people trace it back to the Romantic period, like Lady Wollstonecraft, her vindication of the rights of women, is one of the earliest feminist texts, probably, but that's an exception. The real movement as such, feminist movement begins only, from the 1960s, around that time or after that. So there was no feminism when Ilango created his Chilapadigaram, that I said a lot of people date it to the 2nd century AD, but there are also a lot of people who date it to a later date. But I probably would go with the 2nd century AD. So we cannot talk about feminism here. It's, I think, irrelevant. But like Karni, you don't find that treatment of a female protagonist a similar kind of treatment in Sangam poems, because for one reason, Sangam poems are pretty small and canvas. The size of the canvas of the poet is much smaller than what Ilango had taken. So he can, show so many things that are happening to a single, persona, female persona, in 3 different kandams, sections. But that is not possible for a Sangam poet. Even the long poems like Pattupattu, which are the long ones, they are not really, they are in different genres, like Aattupadai, like guiding a pawn and a musician to a prospective patron or something like that. So there you don't really dwell on the character of one particular female persona. So that kind of treatment was not possible at that time. Or probably if there were other genres like Tonmai, Tolkappiyam does talk about a long text which deals with ancient stories, but we don't have them. Like the ones that we've got, Pattupattu and Ettu Tohai, those are only the anthologies that have come down to us, through palm leaves that were preserved in different places. There could have been texts like that, but we don't have them. So we cannot talk about what we don't have. On the other hand, like you find a very strong female, persona in Kannaki. And that's a very interesting thing that you find. She is strong because of her katpu, and that's a very ancient Tinai value that is being kind of highlighted here in this text. So it's an admirable text, in which I think it's really, the epic is all about Kannaki and, her katpu, so that's what the real text is all about, and her power. Thank you.
Thank you. Giri, Professor Ananta bhai.
Yes, thank you. So it has been a very rich conversation. So like all friends, I am learning. So, and this question about the ordinary and the extraordinary in poetics, the concern that has been raised. So this is an important concern. And so we try to find ways. And I think all along, there is also this striving of presenting very deep thoughts in an ordinary way. Therefore, trying to overcome the bridge, the boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary. I think the spirit of the Bhakti poetry has been that. And also the spirit of the Bhakti poetry in the Tamil tradition also has been that. So in a way, all these traditions, they point to the supposed elitism in the modernist tradition, because there is a kind of dialectic. On the one hand, the modern stands for reaching out to everybody, but there is a elitist closure. But that, how do we make sense of that sense of elitism? It has 2 implications. One is that certain things, there is a kind of complexity that cannot be reduced to a simplistic simplicity. And so there is a challenge of the complex, and the modern is striving, is grappling with the challenge of the complex. So therefore, it is not just elitistic in that sense, but it is
a striving with the complex, and it creates certain element of non-communicability, because everything cannot be just communicated just for the sake of comprehension of everybody, because comprehension is also a striving. We need to strive, and any act of comprehension does not absolve ourselves from the striving to understand. That said, there is also a kind of artificial complexity created in modernity, especially in modern Indian literature, and that also has taken literature away from the people. So therefore, the challenge before us is that how do we continue the emancipatory aspect of the Bhakti and the Sangam literature, that reaching out with the people, but not reducing the complexity to just a kind of superficial, matter of access.
Thank you, Ananta Giri. May I also would like to add something. If poetry speaks truth with no evidence, but insights, no proof, but matter, no values, but the wonders it inspires. And it is very important to differentiate between truth and poetry, and truth and science. And that is very important thing, because Wittgenstein read a poetry in Vienna Circle, and there the question of truth comes into the, I was reading an article where it is mentioned, and I can relate with that thing with Sri Aurobindo also, because Sri Aurobindo considered him with a poet, not philosopher, because philosophy is, not about the truth. Truth is irrelevant. Truth is a matter of science. Philosophy is about how to do things, how to achieve the goals. And what interests me are useless, truth in that sense. So we need to, discuss with the thing that in what language common sense works. Like Kabir used his Doha for emancipatory purpose, but that was also very popular and accepted by common people. In the same way, Tulsidas, for that matter, in order to inculcate ethics and morality in society. So now, how do we write the poem? Now we are writing poetry with some other sense. And there is some also, science also affects our whole aesthetics of art. So these are the very, complex question. And when we think about truth, truth is a thing to be created before any question of knowledge can arise. So of course, we are also running out of the time. So we can also discuss this thing in our coming dialogue or discussion also.
Okay.
So,
can I just add a word to what you have said just now? Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm reminded of a line that I wrote many, many years ago. Poovada Thazhai Madalinil Pootha Kokku. That's a haiku, actually, a Tamil haiku that I wrote many years ago. It actually translates like this. I'm just doing a random translation on the spot. A stalk that is blossomed on the coastal plant. And on a coastal plant which does not bloom. A stalk blooming on a coastal plant that does not bloom, or something. So that is the rough English equivalent of the Tamil lines that I mentioned. I'll give you another one from Wallace Stevens, the first stanza. Among 20 snowy mountains, the only moving thing is the eye of the blackbird. Among 20 snowy mountains, the only moving thing is the eye of the blackbird. Now, do you think this is truth? What is the truth in it? This is certainly, I mean, if you ask any ornithologist or bird watcher, he may not agree with you. What Wallace Stevens says is really true of, the blackbird, because this is the first verse of his poem called 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. In fact, this is Wallace Stevens's first definition of a blackbird. Now, if you want to say, what is the Webster dictionary meaning of blackbird? Now, that is actually the truth. And Stevens's first stanza in 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird is not the truth. That's one way of looking at it. I mean, if you do that, then there's no point in Wallace Stevens writing poetry at all. He's only lying. He's not telling any truth. That's just for you to think about.
Actually, in poetry, most of the time we are weaving fictions.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
When
Yes.
somebody says, you are like a moon, you are like the sun, I don't think there is any reality or truth in it. These are just high-flown fictions. Most of the time, poets are talking. I don't want to say lies, but fiction, I think, is a very decent word to use. And we are indulging in fiction all the time in poetry. All rhetoric, all exaggeration, everything that we are doing, it is in the realm of fiction. So sometimes I think that we people who are writing poetry should be treated as writing fiction also.
Yeah. Another way of looking at this is trying to say that this is the language of poetry. And it's not the same as the language of science. Science uses language in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think it was a wonderful session talking to you. That's all. We enjoyed.
Thank you very much.
So, Minati, Pradhan ji.
Yeah. So I would say, very simple two-liner. Actually, poetry cannot change everything, but poetry can change something. So that is what we all have to agree.
Yeah,
so
like
I'll give Gautam. Yeah.
Sorry for interruption. Finish it.
No, this. Now, I, Minati Pradhan, on behalf of Shraddha Chakra and Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, would like to thank our today's chief speaker, Professor Nirmal Selvamony, for his very wonderful deliberation. And, we had one of the best session today. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I would like to thank our moderator, Professor Kumar Giri, for every week arranging for us to, sometimes very likable subjects, sometimes not so likable subject. Today was my favorite one. So thank you, Ananta for arranging this for us. I would like to thank Dr. Janal Singh Anand, Professor Ganluiji, and Sugandhi Das, all of them for our their engaging participation and asking so many questions. We also got to learn so many things with the discussion. Thank you all. I also would like to thank all our Facebook participants and the today's online platform participants for their active participation. Thank you all. Pardon me if I have forgotten anybody's name. At the last and not the least, I would like to thank our convener, Professor Randhir Kumar Gautam, for arranging and executing all these webinars so well. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Professor Nirmal ji wanted to say something.
Say something, yeah.
It's fine. Poetry does not make things happen, something similar. I know I remember reading Yeats, but I probably maybe misquoting something, so I don't want to say that. I think I need to check and then tell you the right quote. But
magic is also there in
or
the
not
reality.
change. That's a very interesting question. Yeah, but I do think that poetry has a lot of power. At least, Mandiram, as I was saying, it's really all about power. Word, the power of the word. So I believe in it. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Anand also. Thank you so much.